to the cloud, right? Yeah. Okay. All right, here we go. I'm going to share the screen. Hopefully this works. Your screen share is loading. Okay. This looks correct, right? You guys can't see my notes or anything? Yeah. Okay, great. All right, so first thing I should say, last week went really well. I really enjoyed that. There was a lot of questions at the end, and if you guys want to interrupt me and like say something like during the course of this talk, please go ahead. There doesn't have to be a sort of wait till the end sort of thing. You can just sort of like holler at me, you know. Anyway, so brief review from last week. We talked about the sort of human condition, the sort of cosmic insignificance, how it sort of like underrides our entire life. Our existence is sort of defined by the lack of meaning. And we all have this desire to live forever because what we all can't overcome is our inevitable demise. And so living forever becomes an answer to our insignificance. And one way to live forever, the ancients offer us, is through politics. Politics becomes a way to imprint yourself upon the world, to make the world in your own image, to construct something that'll outlive you, that will outlast you. So people will speak your name and tell stories about you after you're gone. And the modern answer to this problem of insignificance is the seeking of private pleasures, private happiness. Many people find themselves in the property.
Can I pause
Yeah.
you super quick and ask a
Sure.
question? And
Yeah.
this isn't me just being, you know, being a fucking shit kicker and fake conservative and all. I'm genuinely curious. How are we able to know that that's an accurate distinction, that the modern state of attempted resolution of that is through private pleasure seeking, but how do we know that that's just a uniquely modern issue and that was not happening?
What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take us through some like some examples of this these types of thought, and what you'll see, hopefully, and you can disagree with me, but like you'll see the sort of intellectual grandfather of the United States, John Locke. You'll see in some of the writings of the early, you know, of the founding fathers, you'll see this sort of desire to find meaning in life through a sort of private pursuit of property accumulation. And I don't mean property accumulation in a sort of like a disparaging way. I mean, what, like the ancient term, like property, what's properly yours.
Sure. Yeah.
You know.
No, I got it.
And so we'll sort of see that, and then so maybe your question is like, well, like how can I trust your sort of juxtaposition of like ancient versus modern? And I guess what I would say is like you don't have to, but like.
No, that answers my question.
I'm not
me asking that was not an attempt at like invalidating your points or anything like that. I was just genuinely curious because to me it seems, and maybe this is like speaking to your point, to me that just seems like the inherent solution is the seeking of personal, you know.
Okay, good. Well, so
I was just curious.
What I'm actually getting this juxtaposition from is from a reading we'll do in 2 weeks. It's Benjamin Constant's Liberty of the Ancients versus that of the Moderns. And there's others who sort of share this thought that I have. And so you'll see, like, hopefully this sort of like tour through the ancients will sort of illuminate maybe a different way of thinking about life. And then we can see where we are with the moderns when we get there. But so anyway, so this is the sort of the general backdrop of the answer. And so what are of the course. And then so what we're going to do is we're diving into the ancients first. We're going to go in order. And we will start our tour of the ancients. We're going to start with the first part of a 2-part preview of the form of political theory before we even actually get to Aristotle, which is where I attribute the sort of like the example of ancient liberty. Well, we're gonna look first at creating a sort of backdrop. And I'm also going to attempt to meet the first argumentative burden of the course, which is like, why study political theory? And the answer to that is political theory is the foundation of social criticism. And in democracy, it is the responsibility of all citizens to be social critics. Thus, it is the responsibility of all citizens to be, in some small sense, political theorists. And so the key concept here is critical citizenship or philosophical citizenship, and like what that means to be a democratic citizen. And so we're looking here at Socrates, who's a sort of famously ugly man. But first, before we actually get into Socrates, we will spend some time talking about this. So to elaborate on the concept, the larger claim that in a democracy, all citizens need to be, in some sense, political theorists. We are going to look at the model par excellence of the philosophical citizen, Socrates, the conscientious citizen, and of course we should talk about the 5th century Athens. Oh man, my roommate's home, so it's pretty loud. Okay, the Athenian democracy. So that it was an extraordinarily, they had an extraordinary navy, which allowed them to dominate the Mediterranean. It's an imperial power. For the lack of a better word, they colonized much of what's called Helios, which is sort of the Mediterranean part of the world. Their imperial power produced massive amounts of wealth, and wealth produced leisure. So the structural conditions existed for democracy. So people could sort of like are free to engage in politics rather than being forced to sort of devote their lives to making enough money to survive, right? So that there was you need to have leisure before you have politics, really, is the claim there. And so the assembly was a major part of life in ancient Athens. The assembly was open to all Athenian males over 18. All had the right to speak. There was a council of 500, which was the main executive body. It was elected by lot from citizens over the age of 30. So by lot means by lottery. So you were sort of like jury duty, selected to go be a part of the executive body. And in this executive body, the agenda was set for assembly, executed its decisions. And so this democratic culture, sort of was pervasive throughout all of ancient Athens. People would go to the agora here, as seen here. You go to the agora, you sort of meet each other in deed and word, see yourself in others, bring yourself into the agora, bring your individuality to the agora, and sort of just engage in politics, really is the idea here. And what we know about ancient Athens comes from, a lot of sort of history about it, but a lot of it comes from the works of Thucydides. And I don't know if you guys can see me as well, but Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War is actually probably the second history book in Western civilization. The first one was Herodotus, and it was titled The History. It was the history of the Persian War, right, which is the war that happened before the Peloponnesian War. After the Persian War was when Athens defeated the Persians. It's the war that the movie 300 was sort of depicting. Sparta was, of course, a main player in this war, but Athens felt that they deserved most of the spoils of victory, and so therefore they sort of developed this empire. And this empire becomes under threat from Sparta. So the Peloponnesian War happens sometime after the Persian War, and it's between the Delian League, which is Athens and its allies, and Sparta, right? And so this is the sort of background. And in this text, in Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War, there's Pericles' funeral oration, which is an extremely famous piece of political speech writing. It's longer than the Gettysburg Address and 2.5 millennia older, but the parallels are really striking, to the point to many are convinced that Lincoln modeled his speech off of Pericles. Lincoln's Union was war weary. Pericles' Athens was also suffering far worse in the war than they expected at this point. Both mention that the deeds of the fallen need not to be extolled by the speaker. They stand for themselves. They gave their lives, and so nothing needs to really to be said about their honor. We should instead speak of the greatness of our city or of our country. And so Lincoln's sort of really modeling the Gettysburg Address off of Pericles. At least many argue that. But so so that both these speeches, they spend their time defending the democratic government and the ethos of democratic society. But the soaring rhetoric and glowing admiration of Athens is tempered only by knowing the history. Because who won the Peloponnesian War? Do you guys know that? Who won the Peloponnesian War?
No clue.
I think Maverick wants to say something.
Athens.
No, Sparta won.
Fuck.
Yeah, so the end of the Peloponnesian War was the downfall of the Athenian Empire. The Athenian Empire stretched all across Greece, and Sparta kicked their ass essentially. Right, so Sparta won under Pericles' direction. Pericles was again sort of first among equals. The height of Athenian Empire was sometimes called I forgot. Is that Periclesian Athens? Like there was a period of time in which Pericles was in charge of Athens, and we sort of like point to that as a glorious time. But under Pericles' direction, the Athenian countryside was abandoned to Spartan advance. It was his idea. Like we're going to sort of just go inside the city, and hopefully we can fight them off from inside the city. We'll use our navy. We can't meet them in the open battle, in the fields, because the Spartans are sort of trained in war in a very particular way, and we don't have the sort of ability to best them under those circumstances. So let's go hide in the city. We'll beat them on the oceans, and we'll outlast them otherwise. But it bore hard on everyone. There's a military stalemate, plague disillusioned the Athenians, and soon after Pericles was fined, dismissed, recalled, and then he died of a plague. There was a rampant plague that happened throughout the city, and he ended up dying pretty much in disgrace.
Hey Brian, can you?
Yeah.
Sorry, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Obviously that movie was ridiculous, right? But how many were they Persian? How many Persians were there?
Okay, so this is a second. So that war is the Persian War.
Ridiculous, bro. That was one of the best movies ever fucking made.
That was a different war. So the Peloponnesian War is a civil war.
This was after, between Sparta. The Periclesian War. What was it called?
Peloponnesian. Right,
Peloponnesian War.
Peloponnese is the sort of like the islands and the sea, the part of the Mediterranean Sea.
And it was intra Greece. Got it.
Yeah, it's essentially a civil war between the Greeks.
Okay.
And it happened after they beat the Persians, and so they're sort of sitting around wondering who should be in charge of it. Should it be the Athenians because they had their really strong navy that did 302? Wasn't there like a second movie that was about like
I don't know. That would be
I think there was. I think there was. It was about
surely
the naval battle. But yeah, I mean so that movie depicts something that actually happened. There's like a site, the gates of Thermopylae, right? Where they're like there was just like a real choke point where all the fucking Persians were sort of like, I don't think they eventually the Persians like broke through, right? Like eventually like that sort of that last stand didn't survive. But they were sort of extolled for standing for a long time with very few men. But anyway, so this is like 30 years after that. And so Sparta ends up winning. Sparta ends up defeating Athens in the Peloponnesian War, instituting a tyranny of like 30 oligarchs in Athens, and we'll actually see some of the results of that in the next reading in Plato's depiction of Socrates' trial. But let's move on. So in the funeral oration of Pericles, there's some really famous lines that we shouldn't miss. And again, the reason we're doing this is just to get a sense of what ancient Athens was like, what they were like. And this is just the sort of form of political theory. This is like kind of what we do. We just kind of go back into the text. We like find some quotes and we say like, and we like talk about them. So
is this when democracy, quote unquote, was created?
That's right.
Okay.
This is exactly right. Yeah. And so this quote is right. This is him talking about ancient Athens and democracy and why it's special. And you're right. The interesting part is because they didn't have anything to model this after. They were trying this out on their own, and they found some glory within it on its own accord.
Let me ask you something. So do you, again, I'm not trying to get us in the weeds here, but do you have any sense of like how that evolved or where that came from? Because that's like such a radical departure from like anything else that's out there.
Yeah, I don't know the history too much of it, to be honest.
It's like pretty cool that they were just like, yeah, let's actually let everyone have a say instead of letting a king, you know what I mean? Like
totally. Yeah, I actually haven't studied that very hard. I don't know how that came about
I was just curious
whose idea it was. It's a good question though. But so I should say that, so I'll just read, what I have here. Let me say that our system of government does not copy the institutions of our neighbors. And by their neighbors, he's literally talking about Sparta, he's that's like kind of what he has in mind. It is more the case of our being a model to others than our imitating anyone else. Our constitution is called a democracy because power is in the hands of not of a minority, but of the whole people. When it is a question of settling private disputes, everyone is equal before the law. When it is a question of putting one's person before another in positions of public responsibility, what counts is not membership of a particular class, but the actual ability which the man possesses. No one, so long as he has it in him to be of service to the state, is kept in political obscurity because of poverty. And just as our political life is free and open, so is our day-to-day life in our relations with each other. We do not get into a state with our next door neighbor if he enjoys himself in his own way, nor do we give him the kind of black looks which, though they do no real harm, still do hurt people's feelings. We are free and tolerant in our private lives, but in public affairs we keep to the law. This is because it commands our deep respect. And so, just hearing that, you wouldn't know that we're talking about a funeral oration. You wouldn't know that we're talking about somebody,
well, but it wasn't like a funeral, right? It was like all hundreds of soldiers had just died and he was like honoring them.
Totally. It's very much a political speech. It's the Gettysburg Address, it's not really about, the folks that they're laying down, but it's sort of, he used it as an opportunity to sort of like do propaganda essentially.
Yeah,
right?
It was a maneuver.
Yeah, exactly. Right. He's trying to like inspire a certain type of zeal, right? And so it's just interesting, and then we, moving on, there's some more stuff here.
So hold on, sorry. Sparta won the war.
Yeah.
And democracy was born out of a fuck you towards Sparta's governmental type? Or when did this happen compared to that war? How long afterwards?
Okay, so Persian War happens.
Uh-huh.
Athens really is Athens is seen as the key
yes.
folks that actually fought off the Persians.
Correct.
300, perhaps Sparta, did some like really cool things, whatever. But right. Athens is sort of seen as like, well, their naval power really fought off the Persians. Okay. What really the Athenian Empire was about was like they had control over all these other city states. We should talk maybe about what the city state kind of looked like. There was no country. It was just a bunch of cities, and so Athens was the greatest of them, but only because they had several other city states like sort of under their control. Like they had an empire. It was an empire essentially, and such that when Sparta started, kicking and screaming, saying like, "Hey, you guys are clapping your backs too much, and you're on the same peninsula as us, and fuck off."
Clapped your own cheek.
Athens, as we kind of read in this, Athens doesn't really think that Sparta is going to be trouble to they're just sort of, we're going to kick your ass. Doesn't end up happening. Sparta ends up winning. We haven't got there yet. This is still early on in the war. This speech is given
Okay.
this speech is
Okay.
given a couple months into the war.
Got it. That was my
Pericles certainly thinks that they're going to win still, even though it hasn't gone as well as he wanted it to.
Got it.
Yeah, Sparta ends up winning, ends up sort of like Sparta installs this sort of military dictatorship of like a bunch of oligarchs essentially, and then Athens has an uprising against those folks. They reinstitute democracy. There's a bunch of public trials. It's a big mess, but that happens later. So right now we're still in the sort of golden age of Athens. Everybody loves themselves. They're gonna beat Sparta. Everybody knows it. So this is where we're at now. So 147, our love of what is beautiful does not lead to extravagance. Our love of the things of the mind does not make us soft. We regard wealth as something to be properly used rather than something to boast about. As for poverty, no one need to be ashamed to admit it. The real shame is not in taking practical matters to escape from it. Here, each individual is interested not only in his own affairs, but in the affairs of the state as well. Even those who are mostly occupied with their own business are extremely well informed on general politics. That is a peculiarity of ours. We do not say that a man who takes no interest in politics is a man who minds his own business. We say that he has no business here at all. And I should just say that again. It's a wonderful turn of phrase here. We do not say that a man who takes no interest in politics is a man who minds his own business. We say that he has no business here at all. So the Athenian Empire, Athens, is really just a what Pericles is trying to say here is that what's underneath the Athenian way of life is politics. That for each individual has to sort of be involved in the state, be involved in general matters, not individual matters. Yeah, and so it's a vision of a politically charged society, a participatory democracy. Political commitment was all but universal, such that to be ignorant or dismissive of politics was shameful. We're almost done with Pericles here. But so later on, he says that I declare that our city is an education to Greece. The rest of Greece, the rest of these city-states, they should all be looking to us, and they should all design to be like us. And what he asks of the citizens that he's speaking to is, I would prefer you should fix your eyes every day on the greatness of Athens as she really is, and you should fall in love with her. So Athens as it really is it what Pericles says it is? That's a real question. Is sort of like how much of this is propaganda, as we said, how much of this is him trying to elicit some sort of military zeal, how much of this is him being concerned about the war effort and wanting to create a positive sort of sense of well-being among the citizens. How much of this is him actually talking about what Athens was like? We have some hints of where he's maybe embellishing things. There are a couple moments in the speech itself where it sort of reveals, at least to the modern ear, the modern reader might sort of like feel a little strange about what he says here. So two of the moments in the speech that are worth highlighting for criticism. He routinely praises manliness and the male energy that Athenians possess. Thucydides himself, in various moments of the text, mentions the hubris of the Athenian Empire in their war making and bloodlust. He wishes for a more moderate foreign policy and military ethos. This is Thucydides talking, the guy who wrote the book that he's sort of taking Pericles' text of his speech and putting it in. So Thucydides is sort of like, whoa, we're a little too sure of ourselves. And so there's a sort of ironic framing of this text where at the very beginning, Pericles' speech is in the beginning. There's a lot of sort of like boastfulness energy in the beginning, and the very end, it's plague. Pericles is dead. Sparta's overrunning Athens. It's like there's a lot of irony, right? And so there's an easy sort of criticism about this sort of I don't know what the right word would be, but there's a sort of like male desire to be sort of militarily strong. There's some of that going on, and then it's just sort of funny to see it not work out, right? And then finally at the end of the speech is this quote that I pulled out here, which is very odd. I sometimes don't know what to make of it too much. He says, he speaks of the dead, he speaks of their city, he speaks of the parents, the surviving brothers, and the surviving soldiers who didn't die. And finally, he turns to the wives and the women of the dead soldiers, and he has this to say. He says, perhaps I should say a word or two on the duties of women to those among you who are now widowed. I can say all that I have to say in a short word of advice. Your great glory is not to be inferior to what God has made you. And the greatest glory of a woman is to be least talked about by men, whether they are praising you or criticizing you. I have now, as the law demanded, said what I have to say, blah, blah, blah. That's it. So your greatest glory is to be least talked about by men. That's what he says to women.
Hell yeah.
Stay at home, right? Stay at home.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I really don't know what to make so much of this. I mean, sometimes I try and read him less critical than he often is in this moment. I'm not positive what he has to say about it. I'm pretty sure it's quite literally just like, this political world is not for you. This life that we're talking about here is not for you. And that's good. Like maybe you belong in a place where you can receive pleasure and satisfaction and
So
fulfillment.
what happened to men in this world who were uninterested in this? What did they do to them?
That's a good question. My sense is that when Pericles is saying, we do not think that you have business here at all, he's really he's being sort of facetious, maybe. He's being sort of like, he's like sort of embellishing the sort of general sentiment, but yeah, I'm sure that they have their own business there. I'm sure they make their lives, they sort of they go about their business. But I don't think it's wrong to say that the political way of life was a much bigger deal to the ancient Athenians than it is to us, for example. Whereas you pick out of a group of 10 people just on the street, maybe a handful of them, maybe 2 or 3 are going to be sort of generally well-versed in politics. And I think that number would be much higher in ancient Athens, right? I think that's the sort of difference.
How many?
Whereas it's not like they would be it's not like they would be sort of like driven out of the city, It's not like that. But
yeah, I got you. He's talking shit.
He's talking a little bit of shit, and I think he really is trying to make it more of a virtue. Even it is a virtue, but I want to make it even more of a virtue. You guys should care even more about politics, right? I think that's what he's kind of after.
What he's really saying is you should vote. You vote for me to be to continue being the first among equals.
Yeah, maybe, right? Yeah.
I don't know how they're like. That's actually a question. Did they have an elective? Did they have I know you said that there was a council of elites, but how did?
Right. So
how similar do we mirror them?
Well, so no, we don't mirror them by a lot. So the assembly was chosen by lottery, right? Any random ass punter, any random punter could be a member of the assembly. I think that during this period of time, Pericles was sort of just in a he was not institutionalized in a sort of like, he didn't have a role in the sort of like president or anything like that, but he was just like ever present in every single political discussion. He just would not leave the agora. He was a very accomplished military general. He was sort of in charge of the military of the defense of the city. He was just sort of ever present. He wasn't like elected.
He was there George Washington minus being president.
Yeah, kind of, right. In the sense that George Washington during the Revolutionary War was never sort of elected anything. He was just
right.
sort of.
He was just kind of the champion.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's what I have to say about Pericles. It just sort of gives us a sort of glimpse into ancient Athens, and it's also, this is kind of what political theory looks like. We just kind of like look at some of the text, and we sort of like talk about it, and we like try and figure out what's going on there. So we're going to move on to talking about Socrates. He was born in 468 BC. His father was a stonemason. His mother was a midwife. He was an Athenian citizen. There's three sort of like classes in ancient Athens. There's citizens. There's what are called medics, which are basically foreigners. And they sort of enjoyed certain protections and privileges, but they weren't able to sort of participate in the assembly. And then there were the slaves, right? And then, of course, whenever I say that, it's sort of funny because, like, obviously women were their own class, right? Because they didn't fall into any of these things. And so, but whenever every text you ever read says that there were three classes, and then they totally forget about, half of the population. So anyway, he was an Athenian citizen. He fought in the Peloponnesian War. By all accounts, he was a war hero. He attended an assembly. He accepted committee work. He was 70 years old by the time of the dialogue that we read today. Today we read Plato's Apology is the title. It's a very famous work. It's by Plato, but it stars Socrates. And I don't mean to say stars in the sense that it was a play or an act or something. This was an actual historical event that happened. Socrates did go on trial. And what Plato means by apology, he means defense. What that text is a defense of Socrates. It's Socrates delivering his own defense for his actions at his own trial. And Plato is sort of acting as a reporter.
Do we have, all joking aside, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Everybody, there is a lot of talk of him being not a real person. Do we have like science? Do we have like, I don't know.
There are other accounts. Not only Plato wrote about this event.
Okay. And his name?
Yes, Socrates was a figure in ancient Athens during this. Like, everybody knew him, and we'll talk about why that. Like it's not like we only have Plato's writings to tell us that Socrates was a real person. Okay. Socrates was a sort of village idiot, for lack of a better word. Like, everybody kind of knew him.
Okay, got it.
And by village idiot, maybe I mean village genius. I don't know. It's just everybody was
like the Galileo.
Yeah, maybe. But so the problem, and we'll talk about this, Socrates never wrote anything down. He didn't believe in it. And the other problem is, for next week, I want to read Plato's Republic. And Socrates is the star of Plato's Republic. He's a character. None of this shit ever happened. Socrates did not do anything that he's said to do in this book. This is Plato speaking with the mouthpiece of Socrates in Plato's Republic. But for today, Plato's the trial and death of Socrates, this actually happened. And so it's hard. I mean, and you'll just have to trust me on that. Like, there's evidence. We have other people writing about that stuff. I think the text itself says something like this apology was sort of like written by Plato right afterwards, and everybody in Athens read it. And there was a ton of people in Athens who went to the trial. So if Plato was sort of talking nonsense and just making shit up, then that's not a really good way to sort of revere your teacher that, was just put to death and just killed himself. And everybody would have been able to point it out. Everybody would have been like, that's not what happened. I was there. And so we know that this actually happened. And we know that Socrates was a real person. But we also know that Plato used him to sort of create Plato's own philosophies and used him as a character in his own writings. And it's a little bit confusing, but oftentimes when we say Socrates says this or Socrates believed this, what we really mean is Plato, because Plato is the person who wrote about Socrates and wrote with Socrates' voice. Socrates doesn't have much of his own philosophies, really. I don't know how the rap goes, but Plato does. Plato has an entire sort of system of philosophical of ontology. Socrates literally does not. All he did is go around annoying people, and we'll see what that's like. So he was notorious for walking around barefoot. Would often be seen staring into space in a trance, absorbed in philosophical contemplation. He was initially prosperous. He was a pretty successful. I forgot what he was. Some sort of craftsman or businessman or something, but he became poor as the result of practicing philosophy, so he gave up on that. And so
Sounds
what can we
familiar.
say? What can we say about Socrates? Well, his aim of life, and what's political about his life? You know, if we're trying to do, why are we talking about him in a political theory class and not a philosophy class? The aim of life for Socrates is to infuse democracy with philosophy, to get democracy to think about what it's doing, to make a quality of citizen deliberation commensurate with its import. So raise the level of democratic discourse. And there's also this sense that the rhetoric of Socrates is much different than the rhetoric of the types of sophistry which was happening in Athens at the time. So there was this sort of obsession with like learning that was happening at the time, that people wanted knowledge. And what people thought knowledge was, at least this is what Socrates says this, what you guys think knowledge is these people coming from these schools outside of town, and they come and they wow you with their rhetoric. They wow you with how they speak. They're persuasive, but they're not convincing. And Socrates thinks that he doesn't have knowledge, he has wisdom. And we'll talk about that later. Philosophy is a less beautiful pursuit of truth, but it is more truthful than the sort of sophistry, which he often criticizes these other teachers for, being more concerned with their rhetoric or how beautiful they speak rather than what they're actually saying. And so similarly, along these lines, he was accused, not in this actual trial, but most people said something about Socrates. They said, he makes the worse argument the stronger. So he makes the argument that you don't really think is true into the one that you have to end up agreeing with. And he does this through logic. He sort of like uses logic to sort of break people's arguments down into their root belief. And then he ends up showing them how that root belief cannot lead to the results that they're trying to convince them. And so this is the famous Socratic dialogues are ones in which sort of words are sort of picked apart, logics are sort of delved into in a really sort of tedious way, and it really annoys everybody when somebody is sort of talking like Socrates, because you can never really get anywhere. You end up finding out that the basic premise of what you're trying to say is not true. That's quite literally what Socrates was on about often. So we will proceed by way of I'm going to give a skeletal overview of the Apology, and then I'm just going to distill some of its more important philosophical claims. That's what that slide's about. Yeah. So he was brought on trial by this dude named Meletus for impiety and for corrupting the youth. Those were the official charges: for impiety, not believing in the city's gods. And when I say city, you can kind of insert country. You don't believe in the countries, in our gods, Socrates. And furthermore, you're corrupting the youth with that. And so these official charges sometimes bleed into what Socrates identifies what he's actually on trial for. Like he says this in the Apology. He's doing philosophy. That's what you're putting me on trial for. or as stated in the text, quote, being concerned about things in the sky and things below the earth, making the worse argument the stronger, and then not believing in the gods, of course, right? So that's the indictment by Meletus, not recognizing the gods, corrupting the youth. And then so the reason why he gets into this pickle in the first place, the reason why he gives up on his pursuits, the reason why he decides to start doing philosophy, starts walking around barefoot, annoying people, is because he has this friend named Chaerephon, and Chaerephon goes to the oracle at Delphi. This was in the Assassin's Creed game. It's just a spot where like there's some gases being released under a building. I mean that this is of course later we found that out, but there's folks that live in this building that sort of give advice. They have visions. They're tripping out on acid, and people come from all over to come speak to the oracle because the oracle is going to know what to do with your life, right? Do not look directly at the oracle. And so his friend Socrates' friend Chaerephon, he goes to the oracle and he asks the oracle, who is the wisest person? Or actually he asks him this, is there a person who's wiser than Socrates? Is Socrates the wisest person? And the oracle says, no, there is nobody wiser than Socrates. Socrates is the wisest person. And this is a riddle for Socrates because Socrates knows in himself, he knows that he's not the smartest. In fact, he thinks he's one of the dumbest motherfuckers to ever live. And he's convinced of this. He knows that everybody else knows a lot more about the world than he does. He's routinely extremely confused about basic things about society, about how things are working, about what is true and what is not true. He is constantly sort of unsure of himself. He doesn't know. This is what he feels like. And so when the oracle says that nobody is wiser than you, Socrates, he becomes sort of his entire life changes.
So who is the oracle? Who is the oracle?
Just a random punter that lives in this building.
Okay, it's not literally like those fucking, those troglodyte fucks on the top. Are they like, I guess what I'm asking is, are they worshipped as some sort of like
kind of, yeah, they are really like, there's some sort of like there's some sort of religious ceremony about these folks that live in this fucking building.
Okay, but they actually don't know shit.
They actually don't know anything. I mean, there's been some like recent study into where this spot actually was in Greece, and it's like right underneath like a methane gas releasing spot.
Brian, what I heard is that when they tested the fucking pot things, they found a bunch of like hallucinogenics and shit in there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So there's all this sort of like, we're trying to figure out what this was all about, but like, everybody believed that the oracle had direct access to some, some sort of truth, right? But such that even Socrates believed that like, what the hell, like there must, I have to sort of like find out what this oracle was saying. How could I be the wisest of them, the wisest in the land when I know to myself that I'm stupid as fuck. So this is the riddle. This is the Socrates riddle.
Is it always this water?
This is what I just told you on the slide. So he goes into the agora. Socrates goes into the city. He goes and he starts talking to everybody. He talks to the politicians, the public men. He says, and he tries to just ask them, what do they know? You must know more than I do. You're a politician. You're very successful. People look to you.
Yeah, I know.
You're going to know more about justice than me, right? Because the politicians are concerned with justice.
It's not
right?
650. It's 550. 550. Sorry.
I'm just going to meet you guys real quick. So they don't have, but what he ends up finding out is these politicians, they don't have knowledge of the just. They don't even have love of it. They don't even seek it. The politicians seemingly just sort of are after their own pursuits. They're after their own ends. So Socrates knows more about justice than the politicians do. So that's strange. So he moves on to the poets. And he asks the poets about their poems. Do you guys have knowledge of your poems? You must know like the sort of hidden meaning underneath all your poems. And what he finds out that all the bystanders, all the people that are around listening to Socrates talk to the poets, he finds out that they understand their poems better than the poets do. It's just people, all they do is listen to the poets and they find out more about the poems. Then he goes to the craftsmen. The craftsmen, they think of themselves as experts and knowledgeable about their craft, but that knowledge leads them to think that they have knowledge about other things, that they're wise in general because they have knowledge about their own particular craft. And Socrates thinks this is a really sort of a terrible error. It overshadows their wisdom. And so what Socrates ends up finding out, the answer to this riddle is that nobody has knowledge. Nobody has more knowledge than Socrates because Socrates knows that he doesn't know. He's the only one that acknowledges that he has lack of knowledge. And so this is the sort of answer to the riddle. In the process of doing this, however, he has made enemies of the entire city, right? Because he has gone around and just told everybody that they're dumb and stupid and annoyed everybody in doing so. He exposed their ignorance, annoying banter. Folks that are just going about their day-to-day life are accosted by this strange man blathering on about justice and the good. And he finally leaves after insulting their intelligence. And so this makes Socrates a pariah among.
Don't they kick him out, or he just leaves on his own accord?
Well, we're gonna find out what ends up happening, right?
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah. So that's the sort of background to the trial. He's put on trial basically because he's been going around talking shit on everybody and saying that you're stupid. And so he's on trial and he gives a cross-examination of Meletus. Meletus is the guy who's putting on trial, remember? And so page 30 of the text that I sent you guys, I'm just going to read a little bit of stuff here. Socrates says he's cross-examining Meletus. He says, I think he contradicts himself in the affidavit. If he says this, he says Socrates is guilty of not believing in gods, but believing in gods. He's sort of saying this is what you're saying to me, Meletus. You say I don't believe in gods, but I believe in gods. And of course, this is strange. What are you talking about? What Socrates ends up doing is he ends up getting Meletus to say the following, which is that you believe in spiritual things. I want to find out where he actually says this because he just uses logic in a sort of annoying way. He gets Meletus to say, you accuse me of not believing in the city's gods, but believing in other spiritual things, right? And Meletus says yes. And then eventually he says, well, does believing in spiritual things means believing in gods? And then Meletus says yes, and he says, okay, so therefore I believe in gods. So these charges are incoherent. What are you talking about? And then the other charge is corrupting the youth. He does a very similar thing. What he ends up saying is, I would not do so willingly, right? A famous Socratean thought. There are no Socratean philosophies except for maybe this, which is that nobody does evil willingly. Wickedness is an error. It's a lack of wisdom. That's what evil is. And so he says, look, if I'm corrupting the youth, I'm not doing so willingly. And so what you should do is just tell me to learn more. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I don't want to be around people these folks that you're telling me that I'm corrupting. They're following me all day long. Plato's among them. They're following me all day long. They're listening to what I have to say. I don't want to hang out with wicked people. And so if you're saying to me that I'm corrupting these folks, then I don't want to do that. I'm doing that unwillingly. And so therefore it's not a coherent charge. I wouldn't do that. Is essentially what he's saying. And so the silliness of the charges is sort of matched in the sort of silliness of how he's sort of rhetorically getting out of the charges. And so as what we
But Brian, he didn't succeed in getting the silliness of attempting, but he wasn't successful. Okay.
That's what I meant.
So hold on. They literally are putting this dude on trial. What are they trying to do? Put him to death?
Yeah, this is what we're gonna find out.
Yes. Well, I know that from the
Yo, this shit is hype, dude. Is there a movie about this?
No, I think about that oftentimes. I think that the first scene would be fuck, what's his name? Sorry, I have to go back.
The first scene would be him.
Charaphon. It would be Charaphon at the Oracle. I think that's what that would be the first scene.
Okay, all right. This would be a great movie. Okay, sorry, keep going. I'm just excited to know the end.
Yeah. So the jury sort of votes, and so it's a jury of 501.
Damn.
The jury acted as they act very similar to a modern jury, but they also act as a judge. So they were responsible for the sentencing as well. Since votes had to be up and down and no discussion was possible among 501 people, it proceeded by way of a simple majority vote for guilty and not guilty. And then if the sentence, if the person on trial was guilty, they would decide the sentence by choosing between the prosecutor or the defense's version of the sentence. So the prosecutor would offer a proposed sentence, and the defense would offer a proposal for the sentencing.
Oh, interesting.
And then the jury would sort of pick between them. And this was like seen to be like it would result in a moderate, decision. That it was seen
Okay.
to like.
Oh, I see. Because you're never going to get the worst of the worst or the best of the best. You're going to end up somewhere in the middle.
Right. And like both the prosecutor and the defense want to sort of advance a proposal that could win, right? It could be
Right.
sort of voted for. And so
I see.
you're not going to sort of advance like death for somebody who stole a chicken or whatever, maybe that's a bad example, but like that, like the prosecutor would want to have a sentence that most people would think is going to be a good sentence, right?
I think that's how we should try Trump.
So anyway, so this is what happened. So the jury's verdict was that he's guilty. He's guilty of not believing in the gods, for being impious, for corrupting the city's youth. And the vote is 280 to 221. Right?
Okay.
And then so there ends up being 3 proposals for punishment. Mellitus offers death. Mellitus says that you should be, the prosecutor.
Jesus Christ, really?
We're gonna put you to death. And then so Socrates goes on this really long, sort of like pretty funny defense of himself, and also proposing 2 different punishments that he could receive. The first one is that the city should provide me free meals. That should be my punishment. And then he says, actually, I know that you guys aren't gonna vote for that. So my next offer is you'll fine me, but my friends will pay for it because I don't have any money, obviously. So those are the options. And then
death or my friends pay for it. Those are the 2 voting options.
Yeah, right. And then interestingly, the jury decides that his punishment will be death. They've sided with Mellitus, and the vote was 360 to 141.
Wow, so you pissed people off.
Exactly. So there were 80 people that thought he was not guilty, but were so pissed off by his defense that said that he's not guilty, but we should put him to death.
Wow,
gnarly.
Legend.
So what is the meaning of the
fucking
apology?
original troll, bro?
the original troll.
Exactly.
original
He's a fucking troll. So why do we even study this? Why do we like this? You can't start a class like this. You can't start a philosophy class. You can't start a politics class without first talking about this for some reason. Nobody ever does it without.
Well, it would be in the hopes that our justice system today was any less ridiculous. But I have to be honest with you. It seems, it's not like these guys are figuring it out. Are they not? There are political role models, and their heads be looking like that though. Like, look at this guy's head.
Right. Well, so it might not be for like just the sort of nuts and bolts of what happened in the trial. A lot of what we love about the apology is in how Socrates talks about himself, his mission, what he's up to, his life, etc. So I will just read a long quote, but it'll give us a sort of sense of like what he's about. There isn't really a great place for me to start, but he says, like, even if you acquitted me now and did not believe the folks who are charging me, if you said to me in this regard, Socrates, we do not believe the charges, we acquit you, but only on the condition that you spend no more time on this investigation, the sort of like, the answering the riddle, right? From the oracle. Spend no more time on this investigation. Do not practice philosophy. If you are caught doing so, you will die. And I say, you were to acquit me on these terms, I would say to you, men of Athens, I am grateful. I am your friend, but I will obey the god rather than you. And as long as I draw breath and I am able, I shall not cease to practice philosophy. to extort you, and in my usual way point out to any one of you whom I happen to meet, good sir, you are an Athenian, a citizen of the greatest city with the greatest reputation for both wisdom and power, and you are not ashamed of your eagerness to possess as much wealth, reputation, and honors as possible, while you do not care for nor give thought to wisdom or truth, or the best possible state of your soul. Then, if one of you disputes this and says he does not care, I shall not let him go at once or leave him, but I shall question him, examine him, and test him. And if I do not think he has attained the goodness that he says he has, I shall reproach him, because he attaches little importance to the most important things and greater importance to inferior things. I shall treat in this way anyone I happen to meet, young or old, citizen and stranger, and more so the citizens, because you are more kindred to me. Be sure that this is in what the God orders me to do, and I think there is no greater blessing for the city than my service to the God. For I go around doing nothing but persuading both young and old, you do not to care for your body or your wealth in preference to, or as strongly as, for the best possible state of your soul. As I say to you, wealth does not bring about excellence, but excellence makes wealth, and everything else good for men, both individually and collectively. So basically what he's saying is like the philosophical way of life is mine, and it's what we should do. It's what we should pursue, right? It's uh, basically what he says there. If like your eyes started to glaze over, is even if you had asked me, if you said to me, look, we'll let you go, just don't practice philosophy anymore.
Right. I would say no. I'm still going to
say no. I would rather die than not continue to pursue the life that I have chosen for myself. So this brings us to the main takeaways, the distinction between knowledge and wisdom. It goes hand in hand with a famous quip by Socrates that invention of writing has enfeebled the intellect. Many have knowledge, few have wisdom. Many sort of repeat, information. They learn a lot about just sort of, minute details about, anything. But they lack the sort of essential ability to make connections. The truly wise know that they do not know, right? And so this leads us into
what?
Another really famous way to describe Socrates is as the gadfly. Gadfly is a sort of fly that buzzes around a horse and sort of annoys the horse. It's just a turn of phrase that we don't really use anymore, I think. But Socrates is the gadfly of democracy. He sort of buzzes around asking us to sort of like look at ourselves. Socrates is the democratic gadfly, exposing self-contradiction. There's a really great quote. I wonder if we should read it, but this has gone on pretty long. Anyway, what he does is he sort of shows the incoherence of day-to-day life, right? The coherence theory of truth is what he professes. Internal harmony. Things must internally make sense. They must be internally true in and of themselves in order for you to like sort of extol them in a general sense. Don't go around talking shit, basically is what he's saying. False knowledge and wrong action. So there's some examples of this, which there's a connection to like the Iraq War, to be honest. There are two examples in Socrates' life of when he was sort of when the politics of the era, when those in charge sort of wanted him to do something and he says no, right? So there's the generals of here, I should find it. Right. So there's an Athenian victory in the Navy, and there was a bunch of soldiers that were sort of like waiting to be rescued, but a really bad storm prevented the generals from rescuing these folks that were out in the ocean. And so what ended up happening is these generals were put on trial for not rescuing these soldiers, and they were tried as a body. There were 10 generals, and they were tried as one. And this was illegal. This was like, every individual has to be tried as an individual. And Socrates was chosen to be a part of this jury. And he's the only person that says, no, we shouldn't we shouldn't kill these people. That they're not guilty, and this whole thing is illegal. By the way, it's illegal to put these people on trial as a body. They should be charged individually. And so Socrates he ended in a lot of hot water for that. And then also there's a really famous time when, so there's this guy named Leon of Salamis. We actually don't know much about him, but he's sort of talked about in this text and in other texts as, and it seems like everybody knew this guy, this sort of Leon of Salamis, some sort of general, some sort of war hero maybe. And so what ends up happening is during the tyranny of Sparta, when they installed these dictators, which happens before this, they asked Socrates and a bunch of other people to go get Leon of Salamis because he was a general during this war, and we're going to put him on trial. So go retrieve him. And Socrates just goes home. You know, the rest of the people that they told to go get this guy went and got him, and then they put him on trial, put him to death. But Socrates just goes home. He gets told to do like this, you know, and you know, that's a crazy thing to do because like there's like a military dictatorship happening at the time. Like obviously he's going to be put on trial and put to death, but like almost immediately after not doing what the oligarchs wanted him to do, that's when the Athenians rose up and like tore down the Spartan dictatorship, and they've installed democracy again. And then it's this democracy that's happening right now that's putting Socrates on trial. And so this sort of funny, sort of roundabout way that like Socrates is living this sort of really dangerous life of just going around being annoying, saying no, not doing things he's supposed to do. But, you know, the wisdom for us is that, you know, he has some sort of insight into justice, right? And he's like not afraid essentially to just like do what he believes to be right, even though it's like going against everybody. Disobedience to unjust demands, right? It's like one of the first examples of civil disobedience. And that ties into this idea of conscientious citizenship, the politics of no saying. So in some sense, Socrates sort of disavows politics, right? He's not sought public prominence. He doesn't want influence. He seems to sort of like be wary of politics. But indirectly, he has sort of achieved prominence and influence by practicing philosophy. And so there's this sort of difference between rhetorical citizenship and philosophical citizenship. He's sort of really against this idea of like being a public figure for its own sake. But he very much thinks, you know, or at least we can sort of ascribe to him that the politics of Socrates is one of like doing a lot of like internal work, right? Doing a lot of internal searching, finding out what's true. And then by that process, you are sort of making the city, the grander thing. And it's a politics of no saying. It's a politics of not being afraid to say no, right? Of just saying like, this is wrong. And then of course the you know, we can't end without, you know, the most famous line of Plato's Apology is on 39. He says, on the other hand, if I say that it is the greatest good for a man to discuss virtue every day, and those other things about which you hear me conversing and testing myself and others, for the unexamined life is not worth living for men, you will believe me even less. So that's the line. The unexamined life is not worth living, right? That's the sort of like bumper sticker on a t-shirt. That's Socrates. So, I mean, we went way over time. I'm going to try to not make it this long because I want this to be like less than an hour every week. But, you know, I mean, what do you guys think? Do you think that like,
I do have a question though. I don't care about the end of it, but
yeah, what's the question?
This is a capitalist society right now.
Who? America?
No, not right now. And during his time. More or less, kind of. What is it? Here's my main question. How did this motherfucker go around talking shit, pissing everybody off? Where do you make his money?
Yeah, so he had a bunch of followers that like fed him, and like, as we'll see, like the very first part of the apology, like the first couple lines in the apology, sort of talks about like what his like what it was like to just sort of be around Socrates. He's just like mobbing around, going to the docks to like talk shit, and then a bunch of like really rich people are like, "Hey, Socrates, come over here, come have dinner with us. Come hang out with me and my father. He wants to talk to you." Like he just kind of lives this life where he just goes around and everybody like takes care of him, you know?
Yeah, interesting.
It's sort of funny.
Can you draw a parallel to that in Ingalls?
Oh.
Everybody who you love ultimately was taken care of. Can you defend yourself?
I've been trying to think of like a modern example of this. Not really of
Well,
Socrates,
dude,
but of like
the modern example, I hate to say it, is like Andrew Tate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's just this sort of like so Socrates might say something like, well, he's like a sophist.
Mr. Beast. He's the modern version. Like he's super wealthy from just talking about, you know, how crazy money is. And then everybody just ends up giving him airplanes and shit.
I was sort of thinking about like TikTok and like, you know, the sort of like YouTube, how that like the folks that are sort of like doing that, right? Whatever we call them, influencers or whatever. I think Socrates would say those are the sophists. Those are the folks that are sort of like, you know, because they're seeking some sort of influence,
Personal
right?
recompense.
Yeah, and I think you have to say, like, if you can say one thing about Socrates, it's like he really didn't fucking care about other people knowing who he was, you know. And I think that the sort of desire to like be known or like, you know,
so like this dude was like, he was kind of a nut, like he was crazy.
Yeah, he's much more of a sort of lunatic, like homeless guy than what I think of when I think of like Andrew Tate, you know. He's like very much just like a sort of like
totally
guy, you know, kind of crazy.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, I think the beauty, like, I think that there's plenty of people who are like that, like living outside of what is, you know, considered reasonable or normal or whatever. Yeah. What I think is really beautiful is that they had this society where, like, he keeps saying it too, where like this idea of mobbing around and annoying people. Like they had a society where like someone like that could exist, you know, like mob around and just talk shit to the dock workers and then be invited to a wealthy dinner that same night. Like, I don't think there is a comparison because of how, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
He was just like a crazy weirdo.
So, you know, there's something, whatever, there's some like silly questions or whatever, but
no.
So next week, it's really stupid that like I'm just gonna try and do 1 week, just 1 hour on Plato's Republic. But that's what I want to do next week, and we'll see some of like what's like. I think the sort of like the kicker, or the sort of like the I don't know, the reason you'll want to tune in next week is to sort of see what Socrates' life was like. Because Plato, I think, is sort of it's very much a it's a fiction, right? None of this happened, but it's like modeled after what it was like being Socrates or being around Socrates. So you have 3 options for next week. Read nothing, right? You'll be fine. If you haven't read anything up until now, it's fine, right?
I'll tell you what I did, just so the class knows.
Yeah.
I plugged in specific questions surrounding a summary and then like specific bullet points for dummies into ChatGPT, and it gave me like a really it gave me like a really good understanding of these texts. Seriously.
Yeah. Okay.
So I got a summary, and then I got the bullet points of like what I needed to know about what he was trying to convey, and
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, so do that again. I mean, any sort of engagement with, you know, any of this, I'm happy about. So anyway, so I'm just saying it's fine to read nothing. If you want to read some of it, books 1 and 7, I think, are like the most important books. The other option would be the whole thing, or if you want even more granular, it'd be 1, 2, and 4, 2, 7. And I have this really funny book here. I don't know. It seems like the rest of the dudes are gone, Howard, but I don't know. But I have this really funny book. It's
No,
called
they're all
How-
here.
I'm right here.
They're all here.
Oh.
We're all here together listening.
So this book is called How to Read a Book. I highly recommend it. Only because reading a book is hard, and like it's not meant to be like a silly thing to say that it's like, you know, we all kind of need to learn how to read. But like reading a book is like a skill that like we don't have. A lot of us don't have. I don't have it, to be honest. I have to like really work at it. So anyway, I can recommend that book because really all that it really says is like, if you're lost, if you're reading something and you don't know what it's about, just keep going. Read the next page. And then maybe the previous page will make sense. That's like, well, a lot of the wisdom of that book is to like kind of detach your mind from every single word that you're reading. Kind of get into the
Got
book.
it.
And so that's like just some general advice. Anyway, so I'm going to stop the recording now so that we don't have to. Stop share for the kid.
Well, stop that recording. Maybe I'll answer.
Oh, I didn't pause.